Hey guys, it's Retired at 40. It's about that time of year when the butternut squash is plentiful. So I'm gonna cut some today out of the greenhouse and we're gonna make some butternut squash soup. And then we're gonna freeze dry it. So this is our first full year with the greenhouse and we're kind of down to just squash now. So we've got some spaghettis, some butternut, and everything else is pretty much dying back. We've had our first snow already, so I'm gonna cut a couple butternut squash. So those are just perfect. The stem is just starting to turn brown. I think these are gonna be awesome. I think before I make my soup, I'm just gonna cut the rest of the squash because freezing temperatures are just around the corner. So I've got my squash now. I'm gonna slice the top off of it, and then we're gonna cut it long ways down the center. We're gonna scoop out all of the rind and the seeds out of there. If you're a gardener, separate those seeds, put them on a paper towel for 3 or 4 days, and you should be good to go for next year. Next, we're gonna cover a baking sheet with parchment paper. We're gonna start our oven on 425 degrees. We're gonna take some olive oil and just cover the squash. You can take a brush like this and you wanna just coat it even on the inside. And then we're gonna cover it with salt and pepper just to taste. Or if you want, you can use some homemade rub too. I'll put a link for my homemade rub. You don't wanna overdo it. Just a little bit is plenty. Since this is also a freeze-dried recipe, if you're going to freeze dry it, you're gonna need 2 butternut squash, and that should fill up your 4 trays. So 1 whole squash will give you about 6 to 8 cups of soup, and depending on the size, obviously, and how much vegetable broth that you add in later. So we're gonna flip these over face down because we want to roast them face down, and we're gonna throw them in the oven as soon as it's heated. You can also put these in the Instant Pot if you want a little quicker version. You won't get as much roasted flavor though. If you want to do it on the Instant Pot, you just put them in for about 12 to 15 minutes. And actually the cool thing about the Instant Pot is the skin will just peel right off. All right, into the oven we go with these. We're gonna roast these for about 40 to 50 minutes. And if the skin gets brown and crunchy, it's not that big a deal. You want the skin so it does peel off nice and easy. I'm gonna set mine for 35 minutes, take a peek at it, and then at 35 minutes I'm gonna chop up the rest of the ingredients so they're ready when the squash is done. So to pass the time here, we're gonna cut up half an onion. You can also use a shallot. We're gonna get a frying pan, add a little bit of olive oil to it. And once that olive oil heats up, we're gonna add our onion. And the onion does not need to be diced real thin because we're actually gonna throw it into a blender or an immersion blender. So it will actually chop it up quite a bit, but what we're trying to do is just kind of soften up these onions. We're gonna add just a touch of salt. We're gonna cook these for about 3 to 4 minutes until they're softened up, and then we're gonna add 4 cloves of garlic. All right, we're gonna add our garlic. Once our onion is kind of golden brown on the edges, 4 cloves total. We're gonna cook that for just about 1 minute. My 35-minute timer is going off. Those actually look really good at 35 minutes. I'm gonna get a fork and we're gonna poke them and see if they're ready. So you want your fork to just pretty much slide through that skin, and you can tell that these are already ready to go. So I'm gonna pull them out and let them cool so they're cool enough to handle. That's exactly how you want them to look. Next, we're gonna combine all the ingredients. The easiest way to do this is with a really high power blender like a Vitamix. You can use a regular blender. It might take you a little bit longer, and you might want your squash to be a little bit more done. You can also use an immersion blender. And if you've never checked out a Vitamix, I'll put a link down below for the one I use. It's pretty unbeatable, especially for this kind of stuff. So the next thing we need is 3 to 4 cups of vegetable broth. And I would start with 3 cups and work your way up to 4 depending on how soupy you want the soup to be and just the thickness of the squash that you're using. Next we want 1/8 teaspoon of fresh nutmeg, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and then a teaspoon of maple syrup. Then we're gonna add our onions or shallot and our garlic. And our last ingredient is, of course, our squash, and by now it should be cool enough to handle. We're gonna remove the skins off of this, and it should come off pretty easy now that it's cooled and cooked. I like to cut it in sections like this. Makes it a little bit easier to pull it off. If you have a Vitamix, it will actually heat it up as it's pulverizing it. Otherwise, you have to eat it right away to keep it warm, or you'll have to warm it back up again. But our last step is just to mix it all together down to a smooth consistency. There we go. So this is a thicker version. If you want it a little bit thinner, you just add up to another cup of vegetable broth. If you're just following the recipe, you're ready to serve. If you're gonna freeze dry, we're gonna go right onto the trays with it. And one batch, if it's about 8 cups, we'll do 2 trays. All right, I'm gonna go pop this in the deep freeze. Let's take a peek at what they look like this morning. Good and frozen. I'm gonna get the freeze dryer going on pre-frozen, and we'll get these in. Alright, so I think we should be good with our default settings. So I'm going to get this started, and I'll see you guys in a little bit. Hey, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and click the bell to get notifications to get new videos when they come out. You get to join me and my family on our journey through our retirement at the age of 40. And while you're there, make sure you give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. It really helps get this video out to the people who enjoy this type of video. Also, if you have any tips, any suggestions, or you just want to say hello, leave me a comment down below. Alright, we're all done. It took about 32 hours. Looks just the way you want it to look. Alright, well, if you've been watching my videos or you've been freeze drying yourself, you know that when anything you're freeze drying turns into just a powder like this and it's just completely solid, you know that you're in the clear, and it's gonna reconstitute 100%. Ready? So you just add as much or as little water as you want, just depending on what kind of consistency you want on your soup. So I would say this is a total win. Nothing says autumn like butternut squash. Butternut squash is a hearty meal. It's really inexpensive, and it's really good for you. And now we know it freeze dries well also. And you probably noticed that I still have my temporary setup in the garage of the freeze dryer. That's all gonna change soon, because coming up real soon I'm gonna show you how to build a stand for your freeze dryer, and I'm gonna incorporate some shelves so you have a place to drain water to. You can keep your oil and other supplies handy. In the meantime, this is Retired at 40. Remember to live life simple. I'll catch you next week.